The world that lied first, they spoke first. Before I raised my voice, before I clenched my fists, before I even understood the rules of the game they were already playing, they spoke first. And they called it concern, they called it advice, they called it loyalty. But listen closely. Concern that corners you is not care. Advice that shrinks you is not wisdom. Loyalty that demands silence is not loyalty at all. It is control. I didn't see it at first because I trusted the tone, the gentle words, the familiar faces. I believed that anyone who spoke softly must mean well. I believed that anyone who smiled couldn't be sharpening a blade behind their teeth. That was my first mistake. They didn't attack me openly. No, they whispered. They whispered doubts into rooms I wasn't standing in. They whispered questions that sounded innocent but landed like poison. They whispered stories that bent the truth just enough to make me unrecognizable. And the worst part, they never said my name with hatred. They said it with pity, just worried about them. Something feels off. I don't know what happened, but they've changed. Changed. That word is a convenient coffin. They bury you in it without ever proving you're dead. I was misunderstood in public, judged in silence, smiled at while being dismantled behind closed doors. I would walk into rooms and feel the air shift, not because I did something wrong, but because something was said, something carefully worded, something impossible to trace back. Something that left no fingerprints. Words don't need fists to break bones, they only need repetition. They repeated the lie until it felt familiar. And familiarity to weak minds feels like truth. I could feel it happening, the slow erosion, the sideways glances, the pauses before my name. And still I said nothing, not because I was guilty, but because I didn't yet understand the game. I thought truth was enough. I thought honesty would protect me. I thought if I stayed real, reality would speak for itself. I was wrong. Truth doesn't win by default, it waits. And while it waits, lies run marathons. They dressed manipulation in kindness. They wrapped control in concern. They used soft language to commit hard damage. And when I tried to explain myself, just once they tilted their heads, as if listening, as if understanding. But their eyes were already elsewhere, already deciding, already closing the case. That was the moment something cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. A hairline fracture in the way I saw people, in the way I trusted words, in the way I believed intention mattered more than impact. I realized something then. The most dangerous lies don't sound evil. They sound reasonable. They sound like, I'm only saying this because I care. They sound like, you know, I'd tell you if something was wrong. They sound like, I'm on your side. Until suddenly everyone else is. I suffered privately while being dissected publicly. I carried questions no one asked me directly. I carried accusations no one had the courage to say to my face. They spoke around me, not to me. That's how you know it's never about truth. If it were, they would look you in the eyes. Instead, they looked for agreement. They looked for numbers. They looked for permission. And they found it. Because people love a story, especially one where they don't have to think too hard. I became a version of myself I didn't recognize, not because I changed, but because they rewrote me. And every rewrite stripped away context, nuance, humanity. I watched my intentions get translated into threats, my silence into guilt, my restraint into suspicion. And still I observed. I listened more than I spoke. I noticed patterns, who repeated what, who avoided my eyes, who suddenly became brave when I wasn't there. That's when awareness began, not rage, not revenge, awareness. I realized words were not neutral. They were weapons, some sharp, some slow, some disguised as help. I realized narratives don't form by accident. They are built, brick by brick, sentence by sentence. And once a narrative is built, people stop asking questions. They move in. They decorate it. They defend it, even if it's false, especially if it's false. Because lies give people roles, heroes, protectors, judges. Truth only asks for humility, and humility is expensive. So I stopped trying to correct them, not because I agreed, but because I finally understood. You cannot outtalk a lie that feeds someone's ego. You cannot reason with a story that makes people feel important. So I stepped back. And in that step, something else happened. The noise became clearer. Without my explanations cluttering the space, their words echoed louder. Without my defense softening the edges, their contradictions sharpened. I saw how often they changed the story, how often they added details, how often they adjusted the tone depending on the audience. I saw fear underneath the performance, because liars are always afraid you'll speak, afraid you'll stand, afraid you'll refuse the role they wrote for you. They spoke first because they needed control early. They needed to frame the picture before I ever entered the room. But what they didn't realize, silence is not absence. It is pressure, and pressure reveals cracks. This was only the beginning, not of my collapse, of my awakening. I didn't yet strike back. I didn't yet confront them. I watched, I listened, and I remembered everything. Because the world that lies first always forgets one thing. The one who stays quiet is learning how the game works. And once you understand the game, you don't need to speak. You only need to wait. The world that lied first, truth was never loud. Truth was never loud. It never kicked doors open. It never begged to be believed. It never needed an audience. Truth doesn't scream. Liars do. I learned that slowly, painfully, by watching who raised their voice first when nothing was even asked. The loudest people in the room were always the most desperate. Desperate to be seen, desperate to be trusted, desperate to stay ahead of the questions they knew would come if the noise stopped. Because silence is dangerous to liars. Silence leaves space, and space invites thinking. So they filled every gap with sound, opinions stacked on top of opinions. Explanations for things no one accused them of yet. Defenses raised before attacks were even imagined. That's how I knew. Truth doesn't prepare speeches, it just stands. I watched chaos masquerade as confidence. I watched volume pretend to be certainty. I watched people confuse aggression with authority. And for a long time, I thought strength lived in the same place. I thought being right meant being heard. I thought if you didn't speak up, you were weak. If you didn't interrupt, you were losing. That's what they want you to believe. Because a silent opponent is terrifying to someone built on noise. I noticed how quickly they rushed to explain themselves, how fast they filled the air, how nervous they became when nothing was said back. They would throw words like smoke bombs, dense, blinding, confusing, stories layered over stories, justifications wrapped in moral language, performances dressed as honesty, noise as smoke. Smoke to hide the cracks, smoke to distract from the tremor in their hands. Smoke to make it impossible to see clearly. And then there was me, standing there still, not agreeing, not arguing, not feeding the fire, just watching, and something strange happened. The more silent I became, the louder they got. They mistook my restraint for ignorance, my calm for weakness, my stillness for surrender. They didn't realize I was measuring them, timing their reactions, noting who panicked first, who needed validation, who couldn't stand the quiet. That's when it hit me. Truth doesn't shout because it doesn't need to. It's heavy. It doesn't float through the air like gossip. It sinks, it waits, it presses down until something breaks. Silence isn't empty. Silence is steel, cold, unbending, unimpressed. Steel doesn't argue with fire. It lets the fire exhaust itself. I began to see stillness differently, not as absence, but as control, not as fear, but as confidence so complete it doesn't require performance. Every time they raised their voice, I lowered mine internally. Every time they rushed to respond, I slowed my breathing. Every time they demanded reaction, I gave them nothing. And the imbalance grew. People who rely on chaos need resistance to feel powerful. Without it, they unravel. They would glance at me, waiting for something: anger, defensiveness, an outburst they could point to and say, "See, that's who they really are." But there was nothing, just quiet, and quiet drove them insane. Because silence doesn't validate their narrative. It doesn't confirm their accusations. It doesn't give them material. It forces them to speak again, and again, and again, until the smoke thins, until the contradictions show, until the tone shifts from confidence to panic, until the story starts changing. That's when I realized those who scream the loudest fear exposure the most. They are not trying to convince you. They are trying to outrun the truth, because truth has a way of catching up. Slowly. Inevitably, you can hear it in their voices when the silence stretches too long. The cracks, the rushed sentences, the unnecessary details. They talk too much because they are afraid you might think. I stopped filling the space for them. I stopped rescuing them from their own noise. I let the chaos speak for itself. And in that chaos, patterns emerged. Who interrupted whom? Who controlled the narrative? Who deflected instead of answered? Who laughed too quickly? Stillness sharpened my perception. I could see through words now, hear what wasn't being said, feel the insecurity beneath the confidence. Truth doesn't compete, it waits. It knows time is on its side, and for the first time I understood the power of restraint, not the restraint of fear. The restraint of someone who knows they don't need to prove anything. Someone who knows that reactions are currency. And I was done paying. Silence became a weapon I didn't know I had been holding. Every unanswered accusation weighed heavier than 1,000 defenses. Every calm moment under pressure unsettled them more than rage ever could, because rage is familiar. They know how to deal with rage. Calm is unreadable. Calm says, "I see you." Calm says, "I'm not impressed." Calm says, "You don't control the pace." And that terrified them. I wasn't loud, but I was present. I wasn't aggressive, but I was unmovable. They threw noise at me like stones, and every stone fell short. Because steel doesn't flinch. That's when the shift began, not outwardly, internally. I stopped equating silence with loss. I stopped thinking power had to announce itself. I understood something ancient, something predators know instinctively. The most dangerous thing in the room is not the one making noise. It's the one watching. Truth was never loud. It was patient. And patience, when sharpened by awareness, becomes something else entirely. It becomes power, quiet power. The kind that doesn't need witnesses. The kind that doesn't need permission. The kind that lets others expose themselves while you remain untouched. This was the first lesson. Stillness is strength. And once you learn that, the noise can never control you again. The world that lied first, I tried to explain, not once, not twice, but over and over until my voice grew tired of carrying truths that no one wanted to hold. I thought clarity would save me. I thought honesty would be enough. I thought if I spoke carefully, calmly, correctly, they would finally see me. I was wrong. I stood there opening my chest, handing them pieces of my story like proof. Scars turned into sentences, pain translated into reason, and they nodded, they smiled, they listened, but they had already decided. That was the cruelest lesson. You can explain everything perfectly and still be unheard by people who came only to confirm what they already believe. I didn't know that at first. I thought disbelief was confusion. I thought resistance meant misunderstanding. So I tried harder. I rearranged my words, softened my tone, removed the anger, removed the sharp edges, removed myself. I thought maybe if I sounded less intense, they wouldn't be threatened. Maybe if I apologized more, they would trust me. Maybe if I carried their comfort before my truth, I would finally be accepted. So I explained, again and again. Every time they questioned me, I answered. Every time they doubted, I clarified. Every time they twisted my intentions, I untangled them. I gave context. I gave timelines. I gave evidence. I gave patience. I gave too much. because they weren't listening to understand. They were listening to respond, to dissect, to judge, to find the one sentence they could twist into a weapon. I didn't realize I was on trial, and the verdict was already written. You can't defend yourself in a courtroom where the judge hates you. You can't convince people whose identity depends on your guilt. Still, I tried, because hope makes you foolish. Hope whispers, maybe this time will be different. Hope tells you they'll see your sincerity. Hope lies gently, and I believed it. I explained my intentions. They questioned my motives. I explained my actions. They rewrote my reasons. I explained my silence. They called it manipulation. I explained my pain. They called it exaggeration. No matter what I said, the conclusion stayed the same. That's when confusion began to rot into something darker. I started replaying conversations in my head. Every word, every pause, every expression. What did I say wrong? What should I have said differently? What could I have done better? I interrogated myself harder than they ever did. That's how they break you. They don't need to scream. They let you do the work for them. I started doubting my own memory, my own intentions, my own reality. Maybe I wasn't clear enough. Maybe I was too emotional. Maybe I deserved the misunderstanding. That's when exhaustion crept in. Not physical exhaustion, something deeper. The kind that sits in your chest. The kind that makes words feel heavy. The kind that drains you before you even speak. Explaining became labor. Every conversation felt like lifting a weight I never put down. I would prepare in advance. Plan my sentences, anticipate their objections. Defense after defense built before the attack even came. And still nothing changed. Because explanation is useless when disbelief is chosen. They weren't confused. They were committed to a version of me that fit their narrative, committed to misunderstanding me because it benefited them, committed to seeing me as the problem so they never had to look inward. That realization didn't hit all at once. It came slowly, in fragments, in the way their eyes glazed over when I spoke, in the way they interrupted at the same points every time, in the way they ignored entire explanations and focused on one line taken out of context. I noticed how they remembered my mistakes vividly but forgot every clarification. How they repeated accusations but never repeated my responses. That's when awareness began replacing confusion, painful awareness, the kind that strips hope from your hands one finger at a time. I wasn't being misunderstood, I was being dismissed, and there is a difference. Misunderstanding can be fixed. Dismissal cannot, because dismissal is intentional. It says, I've heard you, I just don't care. Once I saw that, something inside me shifted. I stopped explaining to be understood and started explaining to survive. I spoke not because I believed them anymore, but because silence felt like surrender. Yet every explanation drained me further. Every attempt chipped away at my dignity. I was bending myself into shapes they demanded, shrinking my truth so it wouldn't intimidate them. And still they looked at me like I was lying. That's when trust began to die, not dramatically, not in one moment, slowly, quietly, like a candle burning out in a closed room. Trust didn't shatter, it faded. Each time they doubted me without reason, each time they assumed the worst, each time they treated my honesty like strategy, trust lost oxygen. I started choosing my words carefully, not because I wanted to be precise, but because I feared how they'd be used against me. That's not trust. That's walking on glass. I realized I was defending myself to people who never defended me. People who watched me bleed explanations and called it accountability. People who demanded transparency but offered no grace. That's when disappointment replaced hope. Hope had told me just one more conversation. Disappointment said, they will never meet you where you are. And disappointment was right. I felt it in my body first. The heaviness before speaking. The tightness in my throat. The instinct to stay quiet because explaining felt pointless. My soul was tired of testifying, tired of proving innocence in a war where truth wasn't valued. I saw it clearly then. Some people don't want answers, they want control. They want to keep you talking, keep you justifying, keep you on the defensive. Because a person who is always explaining is never attacking, and they felt safe as long as I stayed there. That's when awareness fully settled in. Cold, sharp, unforgiving. I was wasting my power. Every explanation handed them leverage. Every defense validated their accusations. Every attempt to be understood kept me beneath them. I had mistaken vulnerability for virtue in a room full of predators. I wasn't dealing with confusion. I was dealing with judgment disguised as curiosity. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. I stopped explaining everything, not suddenly, not dramatically, but deliberately. I began letting questions go unanswered. Accusations sit unanswered. Misinterpretations rot unanswered. And something remarkable happened. They grew uncomfortable. They pushed harder, demanded clarity, demanded reassurance, demanded the same emotional labor I had been giving freely. But I was empty, not broken, empty of the need to convince. Because I finally understood something vital. Explaining yourself to the wrong people does not clear your name. It erases you. I saw how much of myself I had already lost. How much energy I had burned trying to be believed by people invested in disbelief. That was the final blow to trust. Not their doubt, my realization. The realization that my truth did not need their permission, that my story did not need their validation, that being understood by everyone was never the requirement for being real. I had confused approval with survival, and now that illusion was dead. I wasn't angry yet. I was something colder, aware. Awareness doesn't scream, it settles. Rearranges your spine. It straightens you slowly until you realize you are no longer bowed. I no longer explain to convince. I explained only when I chose to, and most of the time I chose silence. Because the moment you stop explaining to people who chose disbelief, you reclaim your power, and they feel it. This was the turning point. The moment confusion died, the moment hope collapsed, the moment disappointment carved space for something stronger, not rage, clarity, and clarity doesn't beg. It prepares. This was not the end, but it was the end of my need to be understood by those who never intended to listen. And from that moment forward, every word I spoke would be intentional, and every silence would be deliberate. Because I was done explaining myself to people who never explained their cruelty. And trust was no longer freely given. It would be earned, or it would be absent. That was the shift, and nothing after this would ever sound the same. The decision to withdraw, they wanted a reaction, That was the point of it all. Every word sharpened just enough to cut. Every glance meant to provoke. Every rumor dropped like a match, waiting for me to burn. They wanted noise from me, anger, defensiveness, collapse. Because a reacting mind is an exposed mind. I saw it clearly now. The questions weren't questions, they were traps. The accusations weren't confusion, they were invitations. An invitation to lose control. An invitation to explain again. An invitation to give them exactly what they needed, proof that they still had access to me. They wanted my pulse in their hands, and for a while they had it. They pushed harder when I stopped explaining, raised their voices, raised the stakes, raised the lies, because silence scares manipulators. Silence creates a mirror, and they hate what they see reflected back. So they poked, they mocked, they exaggerated, they distorted, anything to make me speak. Anything to make me react. Because if I reacted, they could rewrite it. If I reacted, they could point and say, see, this is who they really are. That's how they operate. They provoke until you snap, then blame you for the explosion. But this time, I didn't give it to them. No reply, no defense, no weakness. At first, it felt unnatural, like holding your breath underwater while chaos thrashes above you. Every instinct screamed to respond, to correct the narrative, to protect my name, but I stayed still. And that stillness felt like rebellion, because they had trained me to react, conditioned me to answer, rewarded my explanations with temporary peace. I broke the pattern, and they noticed. They escalated. They spoke louder, more publicly, more cruelly. They wanted witnesses. They wanted pressure. They wanted to corner me into a response. But pressure only works when you fear the outcome. I had already lost what mattered. My reputation had been dragged. My intentions had been twisted. My trust had been violated. There was nothing left to protect except my power, so I withdrew, not physically, internally. I stopped reading between their lines, stopped anticipating their next move, stopped playing mental chess with people who flipped the board anyway. I let their words echo into nothing. And the silence drove them insane, because silence doesn't argue. It doesn't justify, it doesn't beg. Silence watches. They mistook it for weakness at first. That was their final miscalculation. They whispered, "They have nothing to say." They laughed, "They can't defend themselves." They assumed silence meant surrender. They didn't realize silence was preparation. While they screamed, I recalibrated. While they demanded, I detached. While they tried to control the narrative, I reclaimed my nervous system. Remaining calm wasn't passive anymore. It was aggressive restraint. It was saying, "I see your chaos and I refuse to mirror it." That kind of calm terrifies people who survive on reaction. Because now they had no leverage, no outburst to exploit, no explanation to twist, no emotion to feed on, just stillness, and stillness exposed them. Without my reaction, their provocations looked desperate, loud, unstable, excessive. People started noticing, not because I spoke, but because I didn't. Silence stripped their words of contrast. It made their intensity obvious. When one person is calm and the other is screaming, the truth becomes visible without explanation. That's when I understood the real power of withdrawal. Withdrawal is not retreat, it's denial of access. I stopped reacting not because I was afraid, but because I was done feeding parasites. No reply, no defense, no weakness. Every time they pushed, I stayed still. Every time they insulted, I breathed. Every time they lied, I observed. And with every moment of restraint, something inside me hardened. Not bitterness, control. I learned that you don't win every battle by striking back. Some wars are won by refusing to bleed. They wanted to pull me down into the mud where they were comfortable. I stayed above it. They wanted my anger. I gave them indifference. They wanted my pain. I gave them distance. They wanted my attention. I gave them absence. And absence is unbearable to those who depend on you to feel powerful. That's when their tactics unraveled. They contradicted themselves, overreached, exposed motives they thought were hidden. Silence gave them enough rope, and they used all of it. I felt the shift inside me. The old reflex to explain weakened. The urge to defend faded. In its place, a quiet certainty. I didn't need to prove anything to people committed to misunderstanding. I didn't need to perform innocence for an audience addicted to drama. I needed to protect my center. Remaining calm became my discipline, my training, my weapon, because calm is clarity. And clarity cuts deeper than rage ever could. No reply, no defense, no weakness. This was not numbness. This was precision. Every silence was intentional. Every withheld word was strategic. I wasn't avoiding conflict. I was choosing timing. They were fighting to win the moment. I was preparing to win the outcome. That's the difference between impulsive power and controlled dominance. And they felt it. They felt the loss of control. You could hear it in their voices, see it in their urgency. They needed me to engage so badly it exposed them. And the more I withdrew, the more powerful I became. Because I learned something irreversible. You don't owe a reaction to someone who disrespects your peace. You don't owe access to someone who weaponized your vulnerability. You don't owe noise to people who thrive on chaos. No reply, no defense, no weakness. This was the decision, the line crossed. From this moment forward, I would no longer be reactive. I would be deliberate. And they would feel the difference long before they understood it. This was not silence born of fear. This was silence born of strength, and it was only the beginning. Stillness is not surrender. They thought my silence meant defeat. That's how shallow minds interpret stillness. They confuse restraint with fear. They mistake calm for collapse, but listen to me. Stillness is not surrender. Stillness is discipline sharpened to a blade. It is control in a world addicted to impulse. I didn't go quiet because I was weak. I went quiet because I refused to let chaos choose my moves. There is a difference, a dangerous one. Anyone can react, anyone can explode, anyone can shout when cornered, but to remain still while the storm rages, that takes power. That takes command over the one thing most people never master, themselves. Look closely. When people lose control, they call it honesty. When they lash out, they call it passion. When they spiral, they call it truth. But it's just noise, undisciplined emotion masquerading as strength. I saw it clearly once I stepped back. The patterns, the repetition, the same accusations recycled. The same outrage rehearsed, the same moral outrage from mouths that never lived by it. They preached standards they couldn't survive. They demanded accountability they avoided. They condemned behaviors they practiced in private. And the louder they became, the more obvious it was. Hypocrisy doesn't whisper, it screams. And I let it scream. I didn't interrupt, I didn't correct, I didn't expose, I observed. Because observation is superior to confrontation. When you confront, you give them a stage. When you react, you give them relevance. But when you remain still, they perform alone. I watched them contradict themselves, watched their stories shift, watched allies quietly step back as the truth began leaking through the cracks. I didn't need to point anything out. Reality did it for me. Stillness became my vantage point. From there, everything slowed down. Their urgency, their desperation, their frantic need to be believed, and the calmer I became, the more unstable they appeared. It was like watching a storm try to move a mountain. The wind howls, the rain lashes, the thunder demands attention, but the stone does not respond. It does not argue with the weather. It does not chase the clouds away. It does not panic when struck by lightning. It remains. And because it remains, the storm eventually reveals itself as temporary. That was me, unmoving, while everything around me shook itself apart. Silence became my training ground. Every urge to speak was a test. Every insult was a temptation. Every lie was bait. And every time I resisted, I grew stronger. Not emotionally numb, emotionally regulated. That's the part they never understand. Emotional regulation is dominance. Anyone can feel anger. Anyone can feel hurt. But to feel it and not be ruled by it, that is supremacy. I learned how to let emotion pass through me without dictating my behavior. I acknowledged the rage. I recognized the pain. I honored the disappointment. Then I set it aside. Because reacting from emotion is how people lose wars they thought they were winning. Stillness taught me patience, and patience taught me timing. While they burned energy screaming into the void, I conserved mine. While they obsessed over perception, I refined my position. While they chased validation, I built certainty. They thought silence meant I was retreating. What they didn't see was me recalibrating my entire identity. I stopped asking, how do I prove myself? And started asking, who still has access to me? The answer changed everything. I withdrew attention from those who abused it, withdrew explanations from those who twisted them, withdrew energy from those who fed on it. And in that withdrawal, I found clarity. Stillness stripped everything unnecessary away. No performances, no defenses, no justifications, just truth standing alone. And truth doesn't need volume, it needs time. Time exposes patterns. Time reveals motives. Time collapses lies under their own weight. I watched the cycle repeat. The same people who demanded transparency avoided questions themselves. The same voices screaming accountability vanished when it was their turn. The same hands pointing fingers were stained with the same dirt, and all I had to do was wait. Silence isn't passive, it's observant. It listens for inconsistencies. It tracks behavior over words. It remembers what was said when people assume no one is paying attention. Stillness gave me the full picture, and once you see the full picture, you stop feeling the need to argue. Arguing is for people unsure of the truth. I wasn't unsure anymore. I knew exactly who I was. I knew exactly what I had endured, what I had survived, what I had outgrown. Their opinions stopped feeling heavy. Their narratives lost their grip, because I was no longer fighting for understanding. I was protecting alignment. There is a moment when silence stops feeling like restraint and starts feeling like authority. That moment changes you. You stop shrinking to be palatable, stop bending to be accepted, stop bleeding to be believed. You let the storm rage, and you stand unmoved. Stillness taught me something brutal. Most people don't want truth. They want control. They want reactions they can manipulate. Emotions they can exploit. Responses they can dissect. When you deny them that, they unravel. And in their unraveling, their intentions become undeniable. I didn't need revenge. I needed separation. Distance was my victory, because distance turned their chaos into background noise. And from that distance, I could see the entire battlefield. I could see who thrived on conflict, who needed drama to feel relevant, who collapsed when deprived of attention. Stillness revealed everything. And it changed the way I moved. I became deliberate, every word measured, every silence intentional, every step controlled, not because I was afraid, but because I was precise. This was not surrender, this was command, the kind of command that doesn't announce itself, the kind that doesn't beg for recognition, the kind that waits. Let them shout, let them speculate, let them exhaust themselves. I remained, unmoved stone, while the storm destroyed itself. And when the noise finally faded, when the dust settled, I was still standing, not broken, not diminished, refined. Stillness didn't erase me, it revealed me. And from this place, from this calm supremacy, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Anyone who mistook my silence for weakness had already lost. They just didn't know it yet. I let them talk, not because I had nothing to say, but because I knew exactly what would happen if I didn't interrupt them. Lies don't survive silence. They multiply, they swell, they overextend, and that's where they die. So I stepped back. I folded my words into my chest and watched their mouths do the work for me. They filled the air fast, too fast. Every pause I left, they rushed to occupy. Every quiet moment they stuffed with assumptions, accusations, inventions. They mistook my silence for a vacuum. They didn't realize it was a mirror. And in that mirror, they began to reveal themselves. Let them talk. At first, their stories sounded confident, smooth, polished, convincing. They spoke with certainty, with rehearsed outrage, with that familiar tone of people who think volume equals truth. They repeated themselves loudly so they wouldn't have to listen to the cracks forming underneath. Because liars always talk too much. Truth is efficient. Lies are needy. They need applause. They need agreement. They need constant reinforcement. So I gave them space. I let them perform. And the longer they talked, the more careless they became. Details changed. Timelines blurred. Motives shifted. They contradicted yesterday's version with today's confidence. And still they talked. Let them talk. Their egos took over. That was inevitable. When no one challenges a lie, the liar starts believing they are untouchable. They become bold, then reckless, then sloppy. They stop checking their words, stop watching their tone, stop pretending to be reasonable. The mask slips. I saw it happen in real time. What started as concern turned into accusation. What started as I just want clarity turned into character assassination. They escalated because they assumed control. Because silence feels like victory to people who don't understand strategy. They thought I was cornered, so they pressed harder, and every push exposed something new. Their insecurity, their need to dominate the narrative, their fear that without noise they had nothing. Let them talk. I watched allies grow uncomfortable. That's another thing silence does. It makes spectators listen more carefully. When I wasn't reacting, people stopped watching me. They watched them. They noticed the obsession, the fixation, the way my name kept coming up even when I was nowhere in the room. That's when doubt begins, because confidence doesn't chase, power doesn't ramp, truth doesn't stalk. The more they talked, the smaller they looked. The louder they got, the less credible they sounded. And I said nothing. Let them talk. Silence has weight. It presses on people. It forces them to sit with their own words instead of bouncing off your reaction. They couldn't handle that pressure, so they filled it with exaggeration, with emotion, with threats disguised as righteousness. And in doing so, they revealed their real motive, control. They weren't trying to be understood, they were trying to win. And winners don't need to scream. Let them talk. Their overconfidence became arrogance. They assumed everyone believed them, assumed the story was settled, assumed I was finished. That assumption made them careless. They joked when they should have been cautious. They bragged when they should have been quiet. They celebrated early. And early celebration is how people expose their fear of the end. I noticed how often they mentioned silence. Why won't you speak? What are you hiding? Say something. They begged without realizing it, because silence threatens people who rely on manipulation. When you don't respond, they lose their leverage. No emotional hooks, no reactive outbursts. No mistakes to exploit, just absence. And absence terrifies those who need control. Let them talk. I learned something important during that time. Not every battle is fought with words. Some are won by denying the enemy access. Access to your emotions, access to your energy, access to your narrative. They talked because they needed access. I denied it. And without access, all they had was noise. Noise that grew louder. Noise that grew uglier. Noise that eventually exposed itself as desperation. I saw the shift from confidence to irritation, from irritation to obsession, from obsession to unraveling, all because I refused to engage. Let them talk. Silence turned into a test they failed repeatedly. Every time they spoke, they thought they were burying me deeper, but they were digging their own pit. Every word added another layer of contradiction. Every statement another witness against themselves. I didn't need receipts. Their mouths produced them. That's the irony. The people who talk the most about truth are often the ones terrified of silence. Because silence doesn't argue, it remembers, it compares, it connects dots. And when enough dots connect, the picture becomes undeniable. Let them talk. I stayed still. Not passive, still. There's a difference. Stillness is alert. Stillness is aware. Stillness is intentional. I listened without absorbing, observed without internalizing, noted patterns without reacting. That distance gave me power. Because when you stop defending yourself, you start seeing clearly. I saw how predictable they were, how every move was driven by ego, how every escalation was fueled by fear, how every insult was projection. They accused me of what they were doing, blamed me for what they initiated, condemned me for what they excused in themselves. Classic, and they talked. Let them talk. Silence turned into a mirror, and they hated what they saw, because mirrors don't lie. They reflect. They show posture. They show behavior. They show intent. And when people don't like their reflection, they smash the mirror. That's what they tried to do. They attacked the silence itself, mocked it, belittled it, tried to provoke it into breaking. But silence doesn't break, it waits. And waiting outlasts rage. Let them talk. There came a moment when I realized something had shifted. People stopped asking me questions. They started asking them. They stopped demanding explanations from me. They started questioning inconsistencies in the story. That's when silence stops being misunderstood and starts being respected. Not admired, respected, because people sense confidence before they understand it. They feel control before they can explain it. And silence, when held correctly, feels dangerous. Let them talk. I didn't need to correct them. Correction implies equal footing. I had moved past that. I wasn't arguing facts anymore. I was letting reality catch up. And reality is undefeated. Silence bought me time. Time sharpened my clarity. Clarity hardened my resolve. By the time I was ready to speak again, I didn't need to explain anything. My presence did it for me. But until then, I let them talk, let them exaggerate, let them speculate, let them expose themselves, because every word they spoke without my participation became evidence. And evidence doesn't need emotion, it needs consistency. Something they never had. Let them talk. I stood above the noise, not because I was superior, but because I was disciplined. And discipline always outlasts ego. Silence was not my weakness, it was my weapon. And while they wasted their breath trying to define me, I was becoming untouchable. So let them talk. Let them talk until they run out of lies. Let them talk until the truth gets bored of hiding. Let them talk until the world sees what silence already knows. Because in the end, they will be remembered for their noise. And I will be remembered for what I never needed to say. Silence is a language only the powerful speak. Silence changed its meaning. At first, they thought it was weakness, then confusion, then avoidance, but eventually it became something else, a threat. Because silence, when held long enough, stops being empty. It becomes heavy. It bends rooms. It lowers voices. It makes confident people hesitate mid-sentence, and powerful people wonder why their power no longer works. Silence is a language, and only the powerful speak it fluently. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't sharpen my insults. I didn't announce my strength. I removed myself from the noise and let absence do what force never could. They felt it immediately, not consciously, instinctively. The way animals feel a shift in the air before a storm breaks. Something was different. I wasn't reacting anymore. And reaction is how they measured control. Without it, they were blind. Silence became my posture. And posture communicates more than words ever will. When I entered a room, I didn't scan for approval. I didn't explain myself. I didn't fill gaps. I stood. And in that stillness, conversations adjusted themselves around me. Laughter softened. Jokes lost their edge. Eyes flickered. They felt watched without being stared at. That's when silence stops being absence and starts being presence. I could feel it. The subtle recalibration. People spoke faster, then slower. They over-explained simple points, defended things I never questioned. Their bodies betrayed them, because silence removes the script. When there's no response to perform against, people reveal their raw selves, and raw selves are rarely confident. Silence is intimidating because it doesn't need permission. It doesn't argue. It doesn't persuade. It doesn't ask to be understood. It simply exists. And existence without explanation unsettles people who survive on validation. I watched fear grow quietly, not panic, not hysteria, fear with manners, fear dressed as curiosity, fear asking polite questions. What are you thinking? Why are you so quiet? Are you okay? They weren't concerned. They were searching for a crack, a tell, a weakness they could label and reduce. But silence gave them nothing, no emotional leakage, no visible frustration, no reassurance, just calm. And calm is terrifying to those who rely on chaos. I saw eyes lower. Not out of respect, out of uncertainty. People don't look away when they feel superior. They look away when they can't read you, when they don't know where they stand, when they sense they might already be standing below. Silence flips hierarchies. It removes the loud from the top and replaces it with the composed. The one who doesn't chase attention suddenly owns it. The one who doesn't demand space commands it. I didn't dominate conversations. I dominated gravity. The room leaned toward me without knowing why. That's power not asserted, felt. Silence began to follow me, not my silence, the silence of others. They paused when I entered, measured their words, filtered themselves, not because I threatened them, but because my stillness forced them to confront their own noise. And noise always feels shameful next to restraint. They became careful. That was the tell. Care is fear's polite cousin. When people are fearless, they're reckless. When they're threatened, they're precise. I watched the shift. People who once spoke over me now waited. People who once dismissed me now observed. People who once challenged me now tested the air before speaking. Silence had rewritten the rules. Absence became authority. Because I wasn't reacting, every word they said felt exposed, like speaking in a cathedral, too loud, too obvious, too permanent. They couldn't hide behind volume anymore. Silence stripped context away, left only intent, and intent is hard to fake. I saw fear bloom in places they didn't expect. Behind smiles, inside jokes, in confident stances that didn't quite settle. They felt judged without being judged, measured without being evaluated. That's the thing about silence. It doesn't accuse, it lets people accuse themselves. They projected their guilt, their motives, their insecurities onto me. Why are you so quiet? You've changed. You think you're better now? No, I'm just no longer explaining myself to people who never listened. Silence is the final filter. It separates those who respect power from those who only respect noise. The strong adapted. They matched my calm. They lowered their volume. They met me where I stood. The weak, they panicked. They tried to provoke reactions, test boundaries, force engagement, because silence denies them oxygen. And without oxygen, fires burn inward. I watched rooms bend, not physically, psychologically. Conversations curved away from confrontation. Energy shifted. People aligned themselves unconsciously toward stability, toward control, toward the one who didn't flinch. That's when I understood. Silence isn't passive, it's selective. It chooses when to speak by choosing when not to. And that choice, that restraint, signals dominance more clearly than any declaration ever could. I didn't need to say, I'm in control. They felt it. In the way they adjusted their tone. In the way they waited for cues that never came. In the way they questioned themselves instead of me. Silence forced introspection, and introspection is dangerous for people built on performance. I became unreadable, and unreadable is unmanageable. No leverage, no angle, no predictable reaction, just presence, unmoved, unrushed, unapologetic. Silence sharpened my edges, not outwardly, internally. I felt grounded, centered, above the emotional chaos that once consumed me, because silence doesn't react, it observes, and observation creates distance. Distance creates clarity. Clarity creates power. That power didn't need to announce itself. It walked in quietly and took its place. And others made room, not because I demanded it, but because silence commanded it. Eyes lowered, voices softened, rooms adjusted. Silence had spoken, and everyone understood exactly what it meant. My absence became an obsession. I didn't disappear to be missed. I disappeared to be unreachable. And that's where the inversion began. At first, they barely noticed. A delayed reply. A missed presence. A name no longer spoken as often. They told themselves it meant nothing, that I was irrelevant now. That silence meant retreat. That absence meant defeat. They were wrong. Because when you stop feeding people your energy, they don't move on, they spiral. My absence didn't create peace, it created a vacuum, and vacuums don't stay empty. They pull hard. I wasn't there to react anymore, so they reacted to themselves. I wasn't there to defend myself, so they defended their lies. I wasn't there to argue, so they argued with shadows. That's when the quiet one became the threat. Not because I attacked, but because I refused to participate. They started watching more closely, checking for signs, looking for confirmation that I was still thinking about them, still hurt, still angry, still controllable. But absence denies closure, and without closure, the mind rots on unfinished stories. They replayed old conversations, rewrote narratives, invented meanings. Because silence forces imagination to fill the gaps, and imagination is crueler than truth. They talked about me more after I stopped showing up, not to praise, to explain, to justify, to convince themselves. My name became a question mark, and people hate unanswered questions, especially when the question implies power. Why did they disappear? Do they know something? Are they planning something? No, they're nothing. They said that last one the loudest. And the loudest lies always hide the deepest fear. I wasn't doing anything. That was the terrifying part. I was still, and stillness gave their minds too much space. They started projecting. My silence became arrogance, then strategy, then menace, not because I changed, but because they couldn't read me anymore. When people can't read you, they assume the worst, because the worst explains their anxiety. I watched from a distance, not physically. Psychologically, I saw the unraveling. They overcompensated. Posted more, spoke louder, proved themselves harder, trying to reclaim dominance that no one was challenging. That's how you know power has shifted. When people fight ghosts instead of opponents. My absence stripped them of contrast. Without me reacting, they couldn't define themselves. Because some people only exist in opposition. Remove the opposition and they collapse inward. They needed my resistance, my anger, my explanation. Because without it, their narratives had no anchor, so they chased it. Indirectly, subtly, through others, through rumors, through concern. Have you heard from them? Do you know what they're doing? They've gone quiet. Quiet, as if silence were suspicious, as if peace were a weapon. They couldn't understand it, why I wasn't trying to be seen, why I wasn't correcting lies, why I wasn't reclaiming my image, because they still believed power lived in visibility. They didn't understand that disappearance is dominance when it's deliberate. I wasn't hiding, I was withholding. And withholding creates hunger. They checked my absence like a wound, prodding it, expecting a reaction, any reaction, because reaction would mean access. But silence locked the door. No explanation, no defense, no reassurance, just nothing. And nothing drove them insane. They started narrating my silence for me, assigning motives, inventing intentions, because humans fear uncertainty more than truth. Truth can be accepted. Uncertainty must be controlled, and they couldn't control me anymore. That's when obsession took root. Not admiration, not respect. Fixation. I became a question they couldn't answer, a variable they couldn't predict. A presence that existed by not existing. I felt it shift, the energy. The way conversations bent around my name. The way people paused before mentioning me. The way they watched for signs I wasn't giving. Silence turned into gravity, pulling attention without effort. And attention without effort is power in its purest form. They unraveled quietly. No explosions, no confrontations, just erosion. Confidence cracking at the edges, certainty dissolving. They doubted themselves, second-guessed motives, revisited decisions. Because when someone you tried to diminish walks away unbothered, it forces a terrifying question. What if they never needed us at all? That question destroys hierarchies, because dominance requires dependency. And my absence proved independence. I wasn't chasing validation. I wasn't reclaiming my story. I wasn't proving them wrong. I was building something they couldn't see, and what people can't see they fear. They waited for my return, some openly, some silently, waiting for me to re-enter the narrative, to confirm their importance, to acknowledge their existence, but I didn't, and that refusal rewired the power dynamic. I had left the arena, and somehow I was still winning. That's the inversion. The moment the quiet one becomes the threat, not because they speak, but because they don't need to. Not because they attack, but because they've already moved beyond reach. Others unraveled without opposition. Because opposition validates identity, silence erases it. I didn't destroy them, I let them confront themselves. And that confrontation was far more brutal than anything I could have said. My absence wasn't empty. It was intentional, measured, controlled. And in that control, I found freedom. While they searched for me, I found myself. And that's when I knew I was no longer reacting to the world. The world was reacting to my absence, and it didn't know how to survive it. I was no longer reacting, I was deciding. There was a moment, quiet, unannounced, when something inside me shifted. No thunder, no applause, no witness, just clarity. I realized I wasn't flinching anymore. I wasn't bracing for impact. I wasn't scanning for threats. I wasn't preparing explanations in my head before the world even spoke. I was calm, not the fragile kind, the dangerous kind, because calm means choice, and choice means power. For so long I lived in reaction. They spoke, I answered. They attacked, I defended. They doubted, I proved. My life was a response to someone else's noise, and every reaction, no matter how justified, kept me tethered. Reactive people don't lead, they orbit. I see that now. Back then I called it survival, I called it resilience, I called it strength. But it was still obedience to an external trigger. They pulled the string, I danced. Even when I won, they decided the battlefield. That was the lie. The lie that suffering teaches you power automatically. It doesn't. Suffering only teaches endurance. Power comes when you decide what you will no longer respond to. That was the day I stopped living on defense. Defense is exhausting. Defense is temporary. Defense assumes you don't belong where you stand. I was done proving my right to exist. Done justifying my scars. Done translating my pain into something digestible for people who never planned to understand. I didn't need to be understood. I needed to be sovereign. So I slowed down, not out of fear, out of strategy. I let time stretch. I let silence do the talking. I let patterns reveal themselves. When you stop reacting, people expose their scripts. They repeat themselves. They escalate. They show you who they are when you don't interrupt them. And I watched, patiently. Strategic patience is not hesitation. It's observation without emotion. It's letting others move first so you learn how they think. I studied tone, timing, weakness disguised as confidence, urgency disguised as authority. I learned something critical. Most people rush because they are afraid of stillness. Stillness forces accountability, and I had mastered it. While they hurried to control outcomes, I was designing systems. While they fought fires, I was building architecture. I stopped surviving moments. I started shaping futures. That's the transformation they never saw coming. The survivor thinks in days. The architect thinks in decades. The survivor asks, how do I get through this? The architect asks, what do I want this to become? I stopped asking why things happened to me. I started deciding what they would mean. Meaning is authorship. Pain without authorship is trauma. Pain with authorship is fuel. I reclaimed my narrative. Not by rewriting the past, but by choosing the lens through which it would echo forward. I wasn't running from my history. I was placing it exactly where it belonged, behind me. As foundation, every scar became data. Every betrayal became intelligence. Every failure became refinement. I didn't erase the damage, I integrated it. That's power. Not pretending you weren't hurt, but refusing to let the hurt hold the pen. I noticed how different the world felt when I wasn't reacting. Insults lost weight, provocations felt lazy. Chaos looked predictable because reaction creates drama. Decision creates direction. I began to choose my battles. Most didn't qualify. I began to choose my words. Silence won more often. I began to choose my pace, slow enough to see everything, fast enough to stay ahead. They mistook my calm for passivity. That's a common mistake. The loud confuse silence with submission. They don't understand that silence is where plans are made. I wasn't waiting. I was aligning values, vision, timing. I stopped explaining my intentions. Explanations are invitations to interference. I stopped asking permission. Permission assumes hierarchy. I stopped announcing moves. Announcements create resistance. Instead, I decided, quietly, relentlessly. I chose who had access, who got my time, who got my energy, who got nothing. Boundaries weren't walls, they were filters. And suddenly everything sharpened. Focus became lethal. Emotion became disciplined. Ambition became precise. I wasn't driven by anger anymore. Anger burns fast. I was driven by clarity. Clarity endures. They tried to provoke the old me, the reactive one, the one who would defend, explain, engage. But that version was gone, and they felt it. You can feel when someone is no longer available for manipulation. It's unsettling because manipulation relies on predictability, and I had become unreadable. I wasn't cold. I was intentional. I wasn't detached. I was deliberate. Every move had purpose. Every pause had meaning. I wasn't surviving chaos. I was designing order, and that's when dominance became effortless, because effort is required when you're fighting upstream. I had changed the current from defense to authorship. That's the key shift. Defense says, don't hurt me. Authorship says, watch what I build. Defense reacts to threats. Authorship renders them irrelevant. I wasn't avoiding conflict. I was outgrowing it. I didn't need to win arguments. I needed to win trajectories. I didn't need validation. I needed alignment. I didn't need approval. I needed execution. And execution silences doubt. The world didn't suddenly become kinder. It became smaller because I stopped giving it the power to define me. I defined myself. Every morning, every choice, every refusal. I decided who I was becoming before anyone else could suggest otherwise. That's emotional sovereignty. Not emotional numbness. Not emotional repression. Sovereignty, feeling everything but letting nothing rule you. I still felt anger. I still felt grief. I still remembered betrayal. But those emotions sat in the passenger seat. I was driving, and I knew the destination. They saw the results before they understood the change. Different posture, different presence, different gravity. I wasn't louder. I was heavier. Weight comes from intention, from consistency, from decisions stacked over time. I wasn't chasing moments anymore. I was building inevitability. That's what scared them, not my strength, my certainty. Certainty doesn't ask, it moves. And once you move from reaction to decision, everything changes. The world stops happening to you. It starts responding to you. Because you are no longer a character in someone else's story. You are the author, and authors don't react to plot twists. They write them. I wasn't no longer reacting, I was deciding. And once you taste that level of control, you never go back. They began to watch me closely. Something changed. Not in me in the room. I felt it before I saw it. The air grew heavier, conversations slowed. Eyes lingered a second longer than comfort allowed. I hadn't said anything. That was the problem. When you stop explaining yourself, people start studying you. They leaned forward without realizing it, trying to read my silence like it was a threat written in a language they never learned. Because silence creates tension when it no longer carries uncertainty. My silence wasn't empty, it was deliberate, and they felt that difference. At first, they expected a reaction, a correction, a defense, a crack. They were used to noise, used to motion, used to power announcing itself loudly so they could prepare their counters. But I gave them nothing. No signals, no tells, no emotional leakage, just presence. And presence, when it doesn't beg to be acknowledged, makes people uncomfortable. They began to project. Fear always projects. They called me distant. Cold, arrogant, unapproachable. That's what insecure minds do when they can't access you. They label, because labeling feels like control. But the truth was simpler. I was calm, not passive calm, not the calm of surrender, the calm of inevitability, the kind that says, I don't need to move quickly. This moment will come to me. They started watching my patterns, how I entered a room, how I sat, how I listened, how I didn't rush to fill silence. They noticed I spoke last or not at all. They noticed I didn't interrupt, didn't compete, didn't posture, and that unsettled them more than aggression ever could. Aggression is familiar. Aggression is predictable. Composure is terrifying when it doesn't seek approval. They waited for me to break character, to laugh too loudly, to show irritation, to defend my position, but there was no performance. I wasn't acting powerful. I had become it. And power doesn't need choreography. It exists. Silence created tension because they couldn't tell where they stood with me. People crave certainty, even bad certainty, especially insecure ones. My calm denied them that comfort, so they watched closely, as if observation alone might reveal a weakness. They mistook stillness for calculation. They were right, but not in the way they thought. I wasn't calculating moves against them. I was calculating relevance. Who mattered, who didn't, who was noise, who was signal. When you stop reacting, the hierarchy rearranges itself. The loud lose leverage, the aggressive lose attention, the manipulative lose traction, and suddenly the quiet one becomes the axis. I could feel their curiosity shift into caution. They stopped challenging me directly. That was the first sign. Challenges are invitations to engage. They didn't want engagement, they wanted information. So they tested indirectly. Subtle comments, side glances, baited remarks. I didn't bite. Silence isn't just the absence of words. It's the refusal to participate in someone else's agenda. And every time I refused, the tension grew. Because now they were reacting to me. That inversion is everything. Power shifts the moment others adjust their behavior around you. I watched them adjust. Voices softened when addressing me. Jokes recalibrated. Confidence thinned. They were measuring themselves against a still surface that gave no reflection. And humans hate mirrors that don't confirm their self-image. They tried to decode my calm. Is he angry? Is he planning something? Is he above this? Does he know something we do? Questions multiplied. Speculation replaced certainty. And speculation breeds fear, not explosive fear. The quiet kind, the kind that seeps into decision. They began to hesitate, second guess, over-explain. People over-explain when they feel judged by silence. They started talking more, filling space, revealing insecurities they used to mask with bravado. Silence does that. It invites projection. They projected motives onto me that came from their own shadows. They assumed manipulation because that's how they operate. They assumed strategy because they live by tactics. They assumed threat because they understand power only as domination. But domination was no longer my language. I didn't need to overpower. I only needed to remain unmoved. And the more composed I became, the more unstable they felt. They studied my face, my timing, my restraint, trying to find evidence that I was human like them. Reactive, emotional, impatient, but discipline hides humanity behind structure, and they couldn't see past it, so they watched instead of challenged. That was the shift. When people stop challenging you and start observing you, you've crossed an invisible threshold. You are no longer competition. You are a variable, an unknown, and unknowns command attention. They whispered. I didn't listen. They speculated. I didn't confirm. They waited. I didn't hurry. Time became my ally because silence stretches time, and stretched time magnifies pressure. They were waiting for me to make a move. They didn't realize I already had. The move was restraint. The move was composure. The move was letting them reveal themselves while I remained unreadable. They felt watched by someone who wasn't looking. That paradox unsettles people because it suggests awareness without effort. And effortlessness is threatening. They were used to battling energy, resistance, emotion, but I gave them none. I gave them inevitability. I wasn't competing for dominance, I was embodying it. And dominance without noise feels unnatural to those raised on chaos. They couldn't provoke me into proving anything. So they began to prove themselves to me, explaining choices, justifying decisions, seeking subtle validation. They didn't even notice how the roles had reversed. Silence had restructured the room. Hierarchy rewritten without a single announcement. They began to watch me closely because somewhere deep inside they sensed it. I wasn't waiting for permission. I wasn't seeking timing. I wasn't reacting to circumstances. I was inevitable. And inevitability doesn't argue. It arrives quietly, calmly. And by the time people realize what they're witnessing, it's already too late to stop it. I didn't need to dominate the room. The room adjusted around me. And that was the moment I knew my silence was no longer restraint. It was command. I did announce my rise, I didn't announce it. No proclamation, no heralding, no need for applause, because strength doesn't ask permission. Power doesn't seek validation. True dominance doesn't broadcast itself, it manifests. I moved, quietly, relentlessly, with precision that left no room for question. They thought they were watching someone who waited, someone who paused. Someone who considered their petty movements as worthy of attention. They were wrong. Every step I took was deliberate. Every choice carved a path forward that they couldn't follow. Every action replaced words they never needed. I didn't argue, I didn't justify, I didn't explain, I advanced. And advancement speaks louder than accusation, louder than complaints, louder than the clamor of voices that tried to define me. They screamed, they doubted, they mocked, all of it meaningless, all of it irrelevant. All of it evaporated in the shadow of progress. I was no longer reacting, no longer entangled in the drama of their perception, no longer bound by their disbelief. Every result became proof, every victory a statement, every movement a declaration of what words could never capture. Do you see it? Do you feel it? The moment when silence turns into motion and motion becomes evidence and evidence dismantles the foundation of every lie they told about you. I didn't argue, I advanced. It's simple, simple and devastating, because those who speak the loudest rarely act. Those who shout always leave traces of hesitation. Those who demand recognition expose fragility. I left nothing exposed. No cracks, no tremors, no invitations for them to intervene. I let actions do the work. I let time become the canvas. I let every measured move paint a picture too complete for their incomplete minds to interpret. They noticed. Eventually, eyes widened, murmurs slowed. Questions lingered like smoke in a room suddenly aware of fire. I didn't celebrate, I didn't flaunt. I simply existed in the space I carved for myself. And in that space I became unavoidable, unquestionable, unstoppable. They wanted conflict, they wanted debate, they wanted validation for their assumptions. I gave them none. Instead, I let the world rearrange itself around my choices. I let reality acknowledge the inevitability of my presence. I let results speak violently. Every achievement was a statement. Every milestone a weapon. Every forward motion a declaration that power is silent before it consumes. Do you understand? This is how domination works, not by noise, not by words, not by begging recognition. I didn't announce my rise, I became it. I didn't demand attention, I drew it by being undeniable. I didn't justify my existence. I created a world in which my existence was the axis. And they noticed. They always notice. But by then it was too late. Too late to control. Too late to influence. Too late to stop. They could only watch, closely, uneasily. As the quiet one, me moved where they thought movement impossible. I didn't argue, I advanced. Every step forward was an assertion. Every day lived was a message they refused to comprehend. Every silent victory was a blow to the facades they built to ignore my inevitability. You see, announcing is for the insecure. Declaring is for those who need permission to exist. I needed none. I acted. I advanced. And in doing so, I became the narrative. The world couldn't deny me because I didn't wait for it to approve. I didn't negotiate. I didn't bargain. I simply moved. And that is a terror they will never prepare for. The rise doesn't need applause. The rise doesn't need commentary. The rise doesn't need witnesses, though they will watch and they will fear. I didn't announce my rise. I enacted it. And every result screamed what my words could not. Because when you act with intention and without hesitation, you become the standard. You become the shadow that eclipses all noise. You become the force they try to understand but can never reach. I didn't argue. I advanced. Let them speculate. Let them whisper. Let them question. Their questions are irrelevant. Their assumptions are meaningless. I don't wait for permission. I don't seek recognition. I don't require validation. I advance, I move, I claim. The difference between those who shout and those who rise. Shouting invites attention. Rising guarantees power. And power doesn't argue. I didn't announce my rise. I became the inevitable truth they could no longer ignore. Every step forward, every silent victory, every unheralded triumph built a presence too complete, too formidable, too undeniable. I didn't argue. I advanced. And in that advancement, I left nothing for them to contest, nothing for them to deny, nothing for them to reclaim. I didn't wait, I didn't explain, I didn't seek permission. I moved, I rose, I conquered, quietly, relentlessly, inevitable. I didn't announce my rise, I became it. And that is the difference between noise and authority, between desperation and inevitability. Between words that vanish and actions that echo forever. I didn't argue, I advanced. And the world had no choice but to follow. They'll remember what you never said. I don't need the last word. I became the last chapter. The sentence that ends the story before it begins again. The echo that lingers long after the noise has died. Silence isn't emptiness, it's presence. It's a weight that bends the room. A gravity that pulls attention whether it is wanted or not. They will remember, not because I shouted, not because I begged for notice, not because I explained myself to fragile minds incapable of comprehension. They will remember because my absence spoke louder than their voices ever could. Because my refusal to react revealed more than any argument ever would. Because I existed on a plane above their desperation. Because I moved while they waited. Because I became inevitable while they remained predictable. Legacy is not built in the chatter of the crowd. It is carved in the spaces left behind, in the unclaimed air where your presence is felt, even when unseen. They will talk. Let them twist. Let them fabricate. Their lies are their own chains. I don't untangle them. I don't correct them. I don't plead for clarity. I let the world narrate itself around my silence. I let time act as the storyteller, each passing moment a reminder of what cannot be silenced. My silence isn't passive, it's loaded. It's a minefield for those foolish enough to misjudge it. A mirror reflecting their own insecurities back at them, magnified by their obsession with understanding what they cannot. I speak without words. I assert without confrontation. I dominate without effort. They feel it even if they cannot name it, even if they cannot comprehend it, even if they rage against it. Because power does not demand recognition. It cannot be negotiated. It simply exists and the world rearranges itself around it. Do you see? The last word is a trap, the last sentence a cage. The final argument a concession of attention they do not deserve. I don't need it. I became the consequence of all their assumptions, the embodiment of their underestimation, the inevitable reckoning of their own ignorance. Silence outlives noise. Patience outlasts impatience. Dominance doesn't demand respect, it forces it. I am the quiet before the storm, the calm that precedes collapse, the inevitability they can't intercept. Look at yourself. Look at what you've endured. Do you see weakness? Or do you see the proof that you survived? The proof that you mastered the art of becoming untouchable? I don't need validation. I don't need applause. I don't need witnesses to my rise. Because the echoes of my choices will outlast every word they ever screamed. They will remember what you never said. They will feel the weight of your decisions, the gravity of your stillness, the inevitability of your presence. Your silence is a weapon, sharper than any tongue, heavier than any accusation, more precise than any accusation could ever hope to be. I don't react, I decide, I move, I exist. And in that existence, I am immortalized. They will remember, not for the words I spoke, not for the fights I chose, not for the justifications I offered. They will remember because I refused to play their game, because I rose while they argued, because I conquered while they quarreled, because I became the standard they could never reach. Do you understand the power of this? The unshakable authority of restraint, the dominance that requires no demonstration. I don't need the last word. I became the last chapter. I don't need applause. I became the inevitable conclusion. I don't need recognition. I became the shadow that follows them long after I am gone. My silence isn't empty. It's loaded. It's intentional. It's a force they cannot manipulate, cannot predict, cannot survive. They'll remember, long after the echoes of their voices fade, long after their attempts to define me collapse, long after they realize that the story they tried to write was already authored by me. And in that truth, in that stillness, in that undeniable presence, I am absolute. I am inevitable. I am the last word they will ever hear. They will remember what you never said. They will feel it in every glance, every whisper, every hesitant pause, because silence is not empty. Silence is power, and I am everything they cannot contain. Power that need permission. They wanted me dependent. They wanted me tethered to their rules, their voices clawing, their hands pointing, their laws suffocating. I listened once. I obeyed once. I believed that their permission mattered. And then I realized it never did. It never mattered because power is not given. It is taken. It is claimed quietly. It is worn like armor, heavy but invisible to the unworthy. Look at the world. Every hand that reaches for you, every word that shoves and shouts, they think their approval holds weight. They think their noise defines your steps. Their clamor is nothing but smoke. And smoke does not build a throne. I do not move for applause. I do not act to please. I do not wait for a nod, a smile, a sign that says, yes, you may. I decide, I execute, I rise. Power does not knock, it does not beg, it does not apologize, it exists. And I exist alongside it. I do not borrow strength. I do not steal permission. I do not ask, I claim. And they watch, eyes wide, whispers crawling like insects across the walls. They see my calm. They see my pause, and they are afraid because I am untouchable, not by walls, not by swords, not by their anger. I am untouchable because I am free, free from expectation, free from validation, free from the chains they thought would bind me. I have built a throne without an audience. I have conquered silence. I have whispered into the void, and the void bowed. Shadows bend where I walk. Even light hesitates in my presence. Independence is not loud. Independence does not demand attention. Independence is quiet. It is a stillness that unnerves, a certainty that commands, a presence that makes others pause. I do not scream. I do not justify. I do not explain. They wanted to break me. They wanted to control me. They wanted my obedience. I gave them nothing. I gave them silence. I gave them patience. I gave them the slow realization that the world cannot bend me because I am already unbending. Look at your own chains. Look at your own hesitation. Do you wait for someone to approve your steps? Do you ask permission to stand, to speak, to move, to act? Do you bow because the world demands it, or do you rise because your own shadow waits? I chose my shadow. I chose my solitude. I chose my throne built quietly, without witnesses, without permission. And in that choice, I discovered something more terrifying than fear. I discovered myself. Power that need permission, I do not need validation. I do not seek their eyes. I do not measure my worth against whispers or sneers. They speak. They judge. They try to draw me into the noise. Let them scream. Let them believe their chaos can reach me. It cannot. It will not. I move in stillness. I act in patience. I strike in precision. Every gesture is mine. Every decision is mine. Every outcome flows from the truth I hold inside. Inside me there is a throne built of quiet certainty, walls of steel that do not clatter, floors of stone that do not crack, a seat for a ruler who answers to nothing, not even the clock, not even the world. I sit, I rise, I move, and the world reacts. They try to pull strings. They attempt to manipulate, to provoke, to shame. Their efforts collapse like sandcastles against a tide. I do not flinch, I do not bend, I do not yield. Power is not in the reaction, power is in the refusal to be moved. Power is the calm in the storm. It is the unmoved mountain while the winds of envy, anger, and fear howl around it. I am the mountain, I am the storm contained. I am the shadow that grows without announcing itself. I am the consequence they never saw coming. They search for cracks. They look for weakness. They hope for hesitation. I smile quietly because the only hesitation is theirs. Their doubt fuels me. Their assumptions betray them. I am untouchable not because I am unseen, but because I am unavoidable. Do you understand? They will not control me. They cannot influence me. They cannot even predict me. I move in a realm where their noise is irrelevant. I operate in a space where their rules hold no sway. I thrive in the freedom they feared, and in that freedom I discover a kind of power that cannot be challenged. Autonomy, absolute, undeniable. I am not loud. I am not flamboyant. I am not performative. I am inevitable. And inevitability is a language everyone understands, even if they cannot speak it. I walk through the shadows of their expectations. I walk past the walls they built to contain me. I walk alone, yet I carry more weight than they ever could, because I carry myself. I carry my decisions. I carry my consequences. I carry my throne built quietly, steadily, unapologetically. Let them talk. Let them watch. Let them try. I am untouched. I am unbound. I am unstoppable. And they will never comprehend how quiet it can be when a force like this moves. Power that need permission, I do not ask. I do not plead. I do not wait for permission. The world expects requests. It expects negotiation. It expects compromise. I give none of it. Power is mine because I claim it. Because I move through life untethered, unshaken, unbowed. Because I understand that authority does not come from approval, it comes from presence. I am present. I am aware. I am everything they are not. See how they flinch when I enter a room? See how the air shifts, the whispers fade, the arrogance falters. This is the language of quiet dominion. This is a power they can feel but cannot name. They see my actions. They see my results. But they cannot comprehend the discipline behind them. The patience that sharpens every decision. The restraint that turns stillness into a weapon. I act without announcing. I strike without warning. I rise without apology. My throne is not built in the halls of noise. It is built in the silence of resolve. Stone by stone, decision by decision, I assemble an empire no one else sees because they are too busy speaking, too busy reacting, too busy fearing the wrong thing. Look at me. See how I move. Notice how the shadows bend. Notice how the world adjusts its pace around me. Even darkness bows. I am untouchable because I answer to no one. I am unstoppable because my will does not require consent. I am unshakable because my strength is forged in solitude, honed in patience, and tempered by my own experience. They can watch. They can whisper. They can plot. It does not matter. I have already decided. I have already moved. I have already risen. And in my rise, there is no need for applause. No need for recognition. No need for validation. I am the force that cannot be bargained with. The shadow that cannot be cornered. The presence that cannot be ignored. Every step I take pulls the world toward me. Every breath I draw reaffirms my sovereignty. Every choice I make reinforces that my power is mine and mine alone. They will learn eventually that dominance does not scream, that authority does not beg, that fear does not require a threat. It bows quietly, instinctively, inevitably. This is my power, quiet, immense, undeniable. I do not need them. I do not answer to them. I do not wait for them. I am the architect of my world, the ruler of my fate, the embodiment of power that requires no permission. Let the shadows bend. Let the silence deepen. Let the world recognize too late that true strength never asked to be seen. It simply exists. It simply moves, and it conquers. I am untouchable. I am unstoppable. I am power without apology. And they will remember, always, the throne I built quietly, the shadows that bowed, and the force that never sought their consent. Now they ask why I'm quiet, they talk, they shout, they point fingers, they mock. Once I listened, once I argued, once I tried to explain. Now they wonder, now they ask why I'm quiet. The irony tastes bitter. The same voices that tore at me, that whispered lies, that shouted judgments, now they watch in silence. And their silence is louder than any insult. They ask why I do not respond, why I do not defend, why I do not react. And I do not answer, because the question itself carries the truth. The power has shifted, the tide has turned, the hunter has become the apex. They wonder, and in their wonder they tremble. Do they not see? I am quiet because I no longer need their approval. I am quiet because their words are empty. I am quiet because their noise is beneath me. Silence is my statement. Stillness is my strategy. Inaction is my dominion. Look at them, see how they twist, how they struggle. See how the arrogance melts into hesitation. They mocked the quiet ones. They laughed at those who did not shout. They never understood strength does not yell. Power does not demand attention. Authority does not beg for recognition. And now they ask. Now they question. Now they sense what they cannot name. I do not correct them. I do not explain. I do not justify. I do not need to. Everything I did in silence speaks louder than their noise ever could. Every move I made while they mocked, every choice I executed while they doubted, every victory I secured while they whispered, all of it has built the empire they cannot touch and the presence they cannot ignore. They ask why I'm quiet, because I realized first what they never could. Silence is louder than lies. Stillness is stronger than screams. Patience outlasts arrogance. I do not need to prove. I do not need to perform. I do not need to beg for belief. They will learn eventually. That power does not announce itself. That authority does not demand recognition. That fear does not need provocation. It is inherited when the powerless realize they no longer control the narrative. I am the narrative now. I write it with my presence. I dictate it with my choices. I embody it in every calculated step. Let them watch. Let them whisper. Let them panic. The irony is exquisite. The very ones who sought to control, to diminish, to provoke, now they bow to the quiet because the quiet never faltered. The world always asks for noise, but I gave them only results. The world always demands reaction, but I offered only resolution. The world always fears what it cannot explain, and now they fear me. I do not speak because my actions do. I do not justify because my victories speak for themselves. I do not need to shout because the empire I've built echoes louder than any scream. Look at them. Notice how they hesitate. Notice how they second guess. Notice how the arrogance falters in the face of quiet inevitability. This is my triumph. the one they could not predict, the one they could not provoke, the one they cannot undo. I am calm, I am collected, I am absolute. They ask why I'm quiet, because now I am everything they cannot be, because now I am the force they wish to control. Because now I am untouchable. Let them question, let them fear, let them regret. Silence is not absence, it is presence magnified. Stillness is not weakness, it is strategy perfected. Quiet is not submission, it is supremacy claimed. They wonder why I remain so calm, so unshaken, so untouchable. It is because nothing exists beyond my control. Not their words, not their lies, not their attempts at chaos. I am untouchable because I answer to no one. I am unstoppable because my power is mine alone. I am unshakable because I have transcended their judgment, their expectations, their petty provocations. Let them ask, let them search for an answer. There is none, because I have already spoken in every choice, in every victory, in every silent step forward. And in my silence they hear the truth. I am the one they cannot bend. I am the one they cannot break. I am the one they should have feared all along. Now they ask why I'm quiet. And in asking, they confirm what I've always known. That silence is louder than their chaos. That stillness is stronger than their noise. That restraint is more powerful than their fury. And I will remain quiet, because in this quiet I have become infinite. In this stillness I have become inevitable. In this silence I have become the end of their story and the beginning of my own. Let them ask why I'm quiet. The answer is written in everything I have done. And the answer is this: I do not speak. Because I am beyond their reach. I do not argue, because I am beyond their power. I do not explain, because I am beyond their comprehension. I am quiet. I am still. I am absolute. And now they know. This is my response. They wanted words. They demanded reaction. They expected chaos. They hoped for anger. They waited for me to stumble, to defend, to falter. This is my response. Not with shouts, not with excuses, not with pleas. This is my response: presence. The kind of presence that fills a room without uttering a single sound. The kind of presence that bends perception, shapes thought, and commands attention. I do not explain, I do not justify, I do not validate, I exist. And that is enough. Look at me. See the calm that makes their fury shrink. See the stillness that outlasts their screams. See the eyes that do not flinch, the posture that does not waver. I am the proof that control is not loud, that authority does not beg. They ask why I am quiet. I tell them now without speaking, with every measured step forward, with every victory silently claimed, with every gaze that pierces their facade. This is my response, not because I owe them one, not because they deserve one, because silence paired with power is the loudest answer of all. I stand unwavering while they crumble in their own noise. I move with intent while they scatter without direction. I conquer without announcement while they clamor for attention. Do you see it? The way their assumptions fracture. The way their arrogance shatters under the weight of my calm. The way they realize, too late, that I was never playing their game. That the game they thought they controlled was mine from the start. I am the storm they failed to predict. I am the shadow they cannot chase. I am the quiet force that unravels the loudest lies. They ask for reasons. They ask for explanations. They demand validation. I offer none, because my response is living proof. Every step, every decision, every act of unwavering intent, it speaks more truth than any argument ever could. It pressures more reality than any accusation ever held. It delivers more finality than any scream ever threatened. This is my response. A presence so overwhelming it renders questions irrelevant. A stillness so absolute it disarms the loudest. A quiet authority so complete it makes arrogance bow. I do not need to fight with words. I do not need to defend with reasoning. I do not need to justify my existence. The world witnesses and it cannot deny. The chaos they created only highlights my control. The lies they spread only magnify my truth. The mockery they cast only reflects their weakness. They wanted an answer. They wanted to see me falter. They wanted to challenge me. This is my response. I did not falter. I did not stumble. I did not react. I stood. I watched. I advanced. And in that act, I answered more powerfully than words ever could. I answered with presence. I answered with inevitability. I answered with supremacy. Do you hear it? The silence ringing louder than their clamor, the absence speaking more fear than their attacks ever could, the calm crushing their expectations. This is my response. I am not reactive. I am decisive. I am the authority they wish to claim. I am the power they hope to imitate. I am the inevitability they cannot escape. Look at the space I occupy. Look at the stillness I wield. Look at the weight of my presence, unquestionable, undeniable, unstoppable. I do not explain, I do not plead, I do not argue. I respond with the only thing that matters: truth made flesh, authority made manifest, power made undeniable. This is my response. And with it, the final question is answered. The final expectation is dismantled. The final doubt is extinguished. I do not need words. I do not need justification. I do not need recognition. I respond because my presence alone is enough. I respond because my stillness speaks volumes. I respond because the world now knows I am the force they cannot contain. I respond because I am unshakable. I respond because I am untouchable. I respond because I am absolute. Let them watch, let them question, let them despair. This is my response, and it is more than they ever imagined. It is more than they ever deserved. It is everything they feared: silent, steady, supreme. This is my response. I was never silent. I was becoming. I was never silent. I was always listening, always watching, always learning. They thought quiet was weakness. They assumed stillness meant surrender. They believed absence would make me powerless. They were wrong. Every word they threw, every lie they crafted, every attempt to diminish me, it was shaping me, forging me, becoming me. I was never silent. I was becoming stronger than they imagined, becoming sharper than their cruelty, becoming untouchable while they clung to their illusions. I embraced it, the loneliness, the misunderstanding, the mockery. I embraced the weight of being feared, misunderstood, resented. I embraced the shadow that grew behind me, silent and inevitable. I was becoming the anti-hero they whispered about in the halls of their arrogance, the one they warned each other to watch, the one they believed they could contain, the one they thought they could break. I was becoming the truth that cuts deeper than lies ever could. I was becoming the storm they cannot escape. I was becoming the shadow that exposes their light for what it really is: fragile, shallow, fleeting. Let them talk. Let them wait. Let them fall. Because I move beyond their noise. I advance beyond their chaos. I rise beyond their expectations. I do not apologize for being who I am. I do not bend to their morality. I do not soften for their comfort. I am the reckoning they never saw coming, the judgment they cannot appeal, the presence they cannot ignore. Look at me, see the cold confidence etched into every step. See the certainty in my gaze. See the power in the restraint that makes their rage meaningless. I was never silent. I was always becoming unshakable, becoming unstoppable, becoming inevitable. Every lie they told about me, every plot they spun around me, every mockery they offered as if it were truth, it became fuel, fuel for the fire of my ascension, fuel for the empire of my calm dominance. I was becoming the force that renders their opinions irrelevant. I was becoming the truth that cannot be shouted down. I was becoming the power that doesn't ask permission to exist. Let them talk. Let them wait. Let them fall. Every whisper they cast, every expectation they held, it built the throne I now stand upon. Every attempt to bind me only sharpened my resolve. Every insult only magnified my authority. I was never silent. I was never passive. I was never small. I was becoming the one who defines their reality, the one whose presence bends perception, the one whose will commands the unspoken respect of all who oppose. Let them talk. Let them wait. Let them fall. I do not fight with words. I do not bend to prove myself. I do not bow to justify my existence. I am the embodiment of control. I am the incarnation of inevitability. I am the apex of patience and precision. Let them talk. Let them wait. Let them fall. Because while they wasted their time, I was building. While they counted my reactions, I was calculating my rise. While they feared, I was becoming. I do not ask permission to be. I do not plead for recognition. I do not wait for approval. I exist. And in my existence, I claim everything they sought to deny me. Let them talk. Let them wait. Let them fall. I have become the force that speaks louder than screams, the shadow that looms larger than presence, the inevitability that crushes expectation without effort. I was never silent. I was becoming, and in becoming I am absolute. They wanted chaos. I delivered calm supremacy. They wanted noise. I delivered precision. They wanted reaction. I delivered inevitability. Let them talk, let them wait, let them fall, because I was never silent. I was always becoming. And now I am the one they underestimated, the one they feared, the one who stands beyond their reach. Let them talk. Let them wait, let them fall. I am the quiet before the storm. I am the stillness that breaks empires. I am the calm that owns the world. I was never silent. I was always becoming. And now I am unstoppable. Let them talk. Let them wait. Let them fall. I was never silent. I was becoming, and in becoming I am eternal. Remember what you never said. They think history is written by the loudest, by those who shout, by those desperate to be remembered. They are wrong. History is remembered by the quiet, by the ones who act while others talk, by the ones whose presence lingers long after the noise has faded. I don't need their applause. I don't need their recognition. I don't need their validation. I built my empire in silence. I forged my power without a single plea. I claimed my ground while they scrambled for attention. Legacy isn't measured in words. It's measured in consequence, in fear, in respect earned without asking for it. Let them speak. Let them judge. Let them chatter. I am not concerned with empty noise. I am concerned with the weight of my own existence. I am concerned with the truth that lives in every step I take, every choice I make, every shadow I cast. They'll remember what I never said. They'll feel what I never announced. They'll understand the power I carried without broadcasting it. I don't need the last word. I became the last chapter. My silence is not absence. My quiet is not weakness. My restraint is the authority of inevitability. Every whisper they thought they could hide behind, every doubt they assumed would distract me, every insult they believed would diminish me, it became my foundation. I am untouchable, unseen yet unavoidable, present yet unassailable. They measure the world in volume. I measure it in gravity. I measure it in the certainty of consequence, in the certainty that I exist beyond their comprehension. My silence isn't empty. It's loaded. Every look I give, every movement I make, every moment I withhold response, it carries more weight than any scream, any argument, any protest. I do not need to justify my presence. I do not need to explain my choices. I do not need to fight for understanding. I am enough. I am authority incarnate. I am the final verdict they cannot appeal. They will remember what I never said. They will feel the imprint of my existence long after their voices have faded. They will recognize the quiet supremacy that cannot be challenged. Let them talk, let them wait, let them fall. I do not chase approval. I do not seek recognition. I do not bow to expectation. I exist beyond it. And in that existence, I am untouchable. I am inevitable. I am complete. This is the power of silence, the weight of calm, the supremacy of knowing your own strength and never needing to prove it. I became more than a story they could tell. I became the force they could not stop, the shadow they could not ignore, the presence they could not erase. I don't need the last word. I became the last chapter. My silence isn't empty, it's loaded. And in that loaded silence, I am everything. They'll remember what I never said. They'll remember me long after their own voices have died. And they'll know that true power does not shout. True power waits. True power endures. Let them talk. Let them wait. Let them fall. Because I am the quiet they cannot contain. I am the shadow they cannot escape. I am the authority they cannot challenge. I don't need the last word. I became the last chapter, and my silence will echo forever.